Hello. Welcome to the Bat Flip Entertainment College Football Show. It's kind of lonely. I'm all by myself. I have no Adam, no Hank, no stats guy behind the camera to help me along with the show today. This is going to be an interesting one, a bit shorter because of the fact that we are much later into the week, pretty close to the matchups on Saturday. I am recording this Friday night. I will try to get this up Friday night so at least it can be online before the games tomorrow. Hopefully, everybody has enjoyed the podcast that we've been doing the last couple of weeks. Unfortunately, Adam is out sick, and our general host that gives us the "Oh hey, we're live. Oh hey, how's it going?" kind of intro. He is I don't know if I'm in line to say where he is, but he's in Hawaii right now on a sabbatical. We'll just say that. Um, a very interesting week 11 for college football. I'm going to touch on a few things here. We're not going to get into everything, obviously, with how late into the week it already is. I kind of just wanted to touch on what is going on going into this week, some of the matchups that I found to be pretty interesting. I'm going to give my what I believe to be correct top 12 with nobody to say otherwise. Nobody sitting here ganging up on me. Nobody sitting here telling me that I'm incorrect in my uh, obvious statements of fact, where I've had multiple different sources backing me up on it being correct. Um, I got nobody to sit here and gang up on me, so that'll be nice. I'm going to touch on Virginia, the Virginia loss to Wake Forest, the Louisville loss to Cal, and the BYU loss to Texas Tech. We'll talk about that in a minute, and we'll touch on some stuff going on this week as far as matchups I found to be interesting. Like I said, so number one thing, obviously, the big takeaway from last weekend. Obviously, we're a bit removed from it, but the Virginia loss, like I said, to Wake Forest, the Louisville loss to Cal, and the BYU loss to Texas Tech. Let's touch on all of these because because I'm in control here and because I can decide what I want to talk about here. We're going to touch on these matchups in a different way. The Virginia loss, I was personally never a true believer in Virginia. If you go back and listen to the previous podcast that we did, I begrudgingly put them in my top 12 last week, having them at 11, and I was not a big fan of it. I felt like I was almost forced to, more so just because of the fact that all of the other teams that had preceded them in the rankings the weeks prior had just lost. And so at this point, it's almost this revolving door now of teams that are on the lower end of things who are just sneaking into that top 12, that 8 through 12 area, really, that have now kind of continuously cycled themselves in and out each and every week by having some type of an upset loss. And to me, I think that is what has made this season so interesting. It has made this season so compelling from start to finish is that we'll get into Texas later. Week 1, we were talking about Texas being, if not the number one team, a top 3 team in college football. And then after the first couple weeks, we were writing Texas off as there's no chance they get into the playoffs. Same thing with Notre Dame. Notre Dame struggled early mightily, and we were all, most people, I wasn't among that crew, but most people were writing them off saying there's no chance they're going to be able to get into the playoffs. 2 losses this early, there's no chance. The thing about the college football playoff, though, and the way that the committees do it, it's almost better to lose early. It's smarter for Texas and Ohio State to play each other week 1, given the fact that these teams don't really kind of know what they have. We don't really know freshmen coming in, seniors leaving. We don't know how the team's going to mesh. We can only go based off of what we saw last year. That's why you saw Clemson as high as you did. That's why you saw Penn State as a top 3 team ranked coming into the season. Texas, the same thing. These teams that have had previous success last year, Penn State's obviously the shocker of them. You expect them with all of the returning players that got them as close to a college football championship, or excuse me, a national championship. You expect them to be somewhat close to what they were, if not the number one team, at least a top 10 team or a top 5 team. But when it comes to now the parity that you see because of the NIL, I think that is what makes this season in college football so great. And it's why you get to see this revolving door of these teams at 8 to 12 constantly cycling themselves in and out. It's what makes the American Conference so compelling right now. I don't think NIL is the total reason why. I think it's mostly just because football in those G5 conferences are just insane most times. Look across the board, most games, across all conferences, they're very compelling. It's on a smaller scale with less talented players, obviously. And so that's not appealing to most people, but to the diehard college football fans, they love that. You can bet on that game that has a 10-point spread against X versus Y in the Sun Belt or in the Mountain West. And you can sit there and say to yourself, oh, it's a guarantee that so-and-so is going to beat so-and-so, but you don't really know going in every single week. Part of that is the G5 conferences, but now you're seeing that even more in the Big Ten, the SEC, the bigger conferences, the ACC, where you're now seeing those other big teams like a Clemson, who you expect every single time, every year, to be somewhat of a contender. And now you're seeing the terrible season that Clemson has had, partially to do with NIL. There's other reasons for the Clemson part, but you see that across the entire college football landscape. And it's why now you almost can't I can't sit here and tell you it's a guarantee that this team will make it to the playoff right now. I can't sit here and guarantee you that, even say, if I look at my top 12 right now, I'm not going to reveal my top 12, but I could even say probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6, probably half of my top 12, as far as what I would consider where they are ranked right now. There is no guarantee they make it to the playoffs. There's no guarantee that, some of these other top end teams that you would expect, again, that are undefeated at this point, they could slide over the next 2 weeks. Indiana almost just lost to Penn State. And I'll get into more of that later on. That's the point of this, is that there is no guarantee here. There is no guarantee at all that your team, they could be 9-0 right now, 10-0. There's no guarantee they're going to finish the season undefeated, and there's no guarantee they're going to make it to the playoffs. And that is what has made this season so great. The Virginia loss, like I said, going back to that, not very surprising about that. Louisville, I'm a bit more surprised by. Cal, I saw them play earlier this year against Minnesota when I actually got to fly to go see Cal in Minnesota in person in California. That was a lot of fun. But seeing them in person, Cal is, I think, an underrated team that could be an upset team like that, and only losing, what was it, a point by a field goal. Not too surprising. Like I said, those lower end teams, not smaller, lower, that 8 through 12 that you're going to see in everybody's rankings constantly is the thing that shifts in and out. There's no guarantee with those teams. The BYU loss to Texas Tech, to me, is the more surprising one. I have been the one person out of the three of us that you usually see on this podcast. I'm the one who usually sits there and says, not a big believer in BYU. I was much more of a believer in Texas Tech. I feel like their offense has been much better this year compared to BYU. I feel like Texas Tech looked like a more complete team compared to BYU. They've played great. BYU has played great over the last how many weeks. And they've proven themselves against high-end opponents like a Utah that those types of wins, okay, justifies you being in the top 12. But just as quickly as I start to believe in you, you quickly prove that you're not going to, you're not a top 12 team in my eyes. So we'll come back to that later on, though. But the Texas Tech loss, like I said, 29-7, it didn't really feel like that Texas Tech really had even an inkling of struggle against BYU. BYU struggled the whole game. Hopefully, this will not completely shut them down, BYU. That being, I think BYU will be fine. But it's a reminder once again that there's a separation. With how much parity that has been created in college football, there is still a true separation between the actual good teams that you would sit there and actually consider to be a true contender for the national championship versus the pretenders. You know, Hank asked Adam and I think it was a couple weeks ago, about contenders and pretenders. Who do we actually believe could be in the top 12, you know, and competing for the playoffs at the end of the season? And who do we think is going to get themselves ousted and bounced? I mean, truthfully, to me, I think, like I said earlier, I mean, even out of my top 12, I would only consider 6 as true teams. I would sit there and say they are true national championship contenders. It's my top 6. And even in my top 6, this is what's struggling, is because even in my top 6, I don't truthfully believe in, say, like a Georgia. Georgia in so many different ways has just gotten by the skin of their teeth, and you almost have to award them partially namesake, but also partially the fact that they've continuously found ways to win these games. And you have to reward a team that obviously has a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, maybe not nearly as talented as they used to be over the previous years, but they're still talented enough to where you have to sit there and you can't deny them a top 10, top 5 spot. No matter how hard you want to make that argument. They've barely been winning these games. They're not a deserving team. It's Georgia. It's college football. They're the SEC. They're going to get rewarded for it. I'm sorry. It's just college football. But to my point about parity, I wanted to touch on this because no matter how much Hank and Adam want to try to make the argument that some of these other smaller teams in an ACC, a Big 12, like Hank was talking about, and I hate to be the guy, I guess, to sit here and bash these guys, but it's my opportunity now to have my voice out there, to really have it unfiltered and not have somebody argue with me. The true problem to me is I would love for these Big 12, ACC, you know, these secondary conference schools to truly be contenders, to sit there and actually really consider them as I would love to say I could see a BYU winning a national championship. I would love to be able to sit here and say I could see Utah going far in the playoffs. I would love to be able to sit here and say I could love to see a Louisville, or even let's look more at my top 12 here. I would love to see, you know, even a smaller team in the SEC like a Vanderbilt. Like you see these other smaller teams even in the bigger conferences, the teams that you don't see, Georgia Tech. I would love to say that Haynes King can carry Georgia Tech to a semifinal spot in the playoffs. But the truth of the matter is that it's college football. It's not the NFL. And no matter how much NIL money gets pumped into X school or Y school, these big time schools that have the pedigree, that have the history of success, that have the best coaches, NIL is going to be able to create all this different parity where all these other different schools are going to be able to really compete. And Ryan Day is still the number one coach and still the number one team. It's still going to happen. Oregon is still going to be great. Texas, at the end of the day, maybe struggled this year, but they will still be great. The guys that have, the programs that have the right guys, the right coaches, the right staff, the right system, they're all still going to be able to be the number one teams, to be able to be on top. They're going to be the ones that are going to constantly still rule over college football. I'm a Minnesota fan. I would love for the day in my lifetime that Minnesota could turn into a college football powerhouse, or maybe, you know what, scratch that. Not even a college football powerhouse, but just turn into a team that could actually legitimately make a playoff run. And that at the end of the day, I could see making it to the national championship. I would love for that to happen, but I'm a realist. I look at things for the way that they are, the way I see them. And the way I see it is no matter how hard we try, college football is still going to be ruled as far as who gets the championship at the end. It's still going to be ruled by the biggest schools with the most money, with the best coaches. The BYU story, it's nice. The Virginia story, it's nice. The Louisville story, it's nice. But look at the playoff heading into this weekend. It's still Ohio State, A&M, Alabama, Georgia's up there. Oregon's still in the top 10. Notre Dame, Texas is back in the top 10 at 10. Oklahoma's still up there, for Christ's sake. I mean, Michigan, who I believe has been the biggest pretender all year, even they're 18th right now. They're still ranked 18th. And look at it, the top 5 spots are still Big Ten and SEC. They put Texas Tech at 6, and I still believe that that's high. I still think that that's high. I still think that they're a 10 to 12 team most weeks. Do I actually believe that Texas Tech can win the national championship? I would love to say yes. I would love to say yes. To me, right now, it's a 2-horse race. It's a 2-horse race. No matter how much parity we have created, it is still a 2-horse race at the end of the day. I love for A&M to be a true contender as well. I have questions about them. And I know I just earlier talked about Indiana not being, a true, they're a true contender, and even they're still struggling. Teams are going to struggle every week during the regular season. No one's going to have a perfect season. Ohio State, they're going to struggle. They might struggle in the Big Ten championship when they eventually do play Indiana. They may struggle there, and it might not be a blowout win. But there are still these select schools with these select coaches that are still going to rule over college football no matter how hard we try. NIL will help close the gap, and it will allow what I believe NIL will allow. I don't think it will ever allow the BYUs, the Virginias, the Louisvilles, like I said, the ACCs, the mid to even high ACC teams to rule college football. I don't think a Big 12 school will ever rule college football. Now, when I say rule, I mean dynasty level, like year after year after year of constant success in the sense of, if not winning the national championship, getting close and making it to the semifinals or making it to the finals. The years that Ohio State has is what I'm talking about here. That is a level of success I do not ever see, probably for, I don't know how many years, maybe not even in my lifetime. I don't see that happening for a Big 12 school, an ACC school. The only way that will happen is, and here's the thing, I don't even know what type of money that some of these other schools have at their disposal for their athletic program and the amount of money that they can give in NIL money. I don't know. But the only way that this happens is if a Big 12 school, an ACC school, one of these other smaller schools, they can get a Kurt Signetti. It takes that type of, honestly, luck. Did anybody think that Indiana and Kurt Signetti would turn into this juggernaut this year? Did anybody see this coming? I understand that his famous little quote is, "All I do is win. Look at my track record," or whatever he says. I understand that. But how many other guys who have came from smaller schools in the Sun Belt, the Mountain West, the MAC, all these other smaller schools that have found success with certain coaches and then they get a better job and they completely flunk out and it fails? It constantly happens. Now, I would ask you to say, name me a, I could name you how many different coaches that have had that happen, but the list is too long. Not only that, but who remembers these people? Who remembers the constant failures? You only remember the successes. You only remember the Kurt Signettis. The NIL helps so much in the sense that, like I said, it can close the gap only so much. And it closes the gap, to me, what makes the NIL like a I don't know if I said this already, but I'm going to make this point now so I can end it. What the NIL and the parity in college football now allows is instead of the same teams that are 6 to 12, now you have different teams in that 6 to 12 every year. You're going to see different teams in that 6 to 12. So this year, it's somebody from the American to take that 12th spot in the playoffs. Next year, it'll be someone from the Mountain West, or it'll maybe be somebody from the Sun Belt. You don't know. Hell, this year, we don't know that it's for sure going to be an American team. It could be a Mountain West team. It could be a Sun Belt team. You don't know. San Diego State is still out there. Boise, people like Boise State. Boise State's still out there. American Conference is beating up on itself so badly right now that it's still not a guarantee that it's going to be USF or Memphis or, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a guarantee that it's going to be any of those American Conference teams. Not to mention the other 5 spots, that's 6 to 11. It's not a guarantee that Oklahoma is going to make it, or Texas is going to make it, or Notre Dame's going to make it. It's not a guarantee that some of these other better teams that are in that spot are going to make it. They could easily have bad weeks. Texas is about to face A&M at the end of the season. Is it a guarantee A&M is going to beat Texas? It's just like it's not a guarantee that Texas is going to beat A&M. It's vice versa, the same. It's not a guarantee of anything any given Saturday. And more than now is it truly any given Saturday. And that's what has gotten me even more interested in college football now, is that ability to see different teams from that 6 to 12 constantly be shuffled, constantly be moved, constantly be rotated. Now, to my point about parity and dynasties and teams that continuously rule, I said this last week in a true shocking fashion. Texas is back. And I did not see it coming. I said earlier, if you go back and listen to previous podcasts, I think it was the first podcast I ever did for the Bad Flip Entertainment College Football Show, the first one I ever did. I believed that Notre Dame was not out of it. I thought that there was still a path that if Notre Dame ran the table, they could play themselves back into it. Like I said earlier, you lose early, it's better to lose early. No one is talking about Alabama's loss to Florida State. No one's talking about it. Do you want to know why? Because Alabama week 1 is a different team than they were now. They're 2 different teams. Teams evolve throughout a season. It doesn't matter what sport you're in. Teams evolve throughout the season. You can struggle early in the first couple weeks. You can go on an 0-3 bender to start the season and run the table and be the best team by the end of the season. That goes for football, baseball, basketball, hockey. It doesn't matter what sport you pick. It's the same across the board. Teams develop over time. Chemistry is developed over time. Some teams start great and end terrible. Texas is one of these teams that has started rough, and they have slowly, incrementally turned it around and gotten themselves back in the conversation. Now, I want to make this point. Do I think that Texas is a guaranteed playoff team? Absolutely not. They could easily lose this week to Georgia, and we would not be even talking about them anymore. They'd be a 3-loss team, and at this point, anybody with sense would write them off. At this point, hey, I don't care that you lost 2 games early. That's almost your mulligan. It's like a mulligan at that point. You lose early, and if you run the table and you look like a good team by the end, okay, then you can sneak in. Then, okay, we give you that grace period. Okay, you lost to Ohio State 14-7 week 1. You struggled a bit. Arch Manning has not looked great at the beginning of the season. He looked bad. We can just say that. He looked pretty bad. Okay, we gave you your mulligan. Now, at this point, as the season has gone on, you can't lose to Georgia. You can't lose to A&M. You can't. If you lose to either one of those teams, I don't think you're in the playoff. I don't think you should be considered for the playoffs. A 3-loss team in the SEC should not be considered for the playoffs. Personal opinion. And that goes the same for like a Big 12 or an ACC. where it comes to that, like I understand my 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 co-hosts would very much disagree with this and hate this, but it is a reality of Big Ten and SEC still rule college football in so many different ways to the point where an SEC team or a Big Ten team that's one of their high-end teams, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, LSU, some of these other bigger schools, these are the teams that you give extra leeway to because you know they get the best players. They have the best people. Indiana has some of the best players. Ohio State has some of the best players. Alabama, Georgia, A&M, they have some of these best players. And not only that, but the two conferences in general usually get the best players. I'm sorry. That's why a Big 12 school is so much more scrutinized for a loss than an SEC or a Big 10 school. They just are. It's a reality of college football that is not going to change. And so sitting there bitching about it isn't going to do anything. It's a reality of just how it is. Those big time conferences get the best players. People who are voting in the college football playoff to rank whoever wherever teams are ranked, they know they have the best players. I'm sorry. We know that Texas has some of the best players compared to, say, a Houston, compared to an Arizona State, compared to a Virginia, compared to some of these other mid-tier schools in the mid-tier conferences. They just do. So you're going to give more leeway to said schools. You're going to give more leeway to a Notre Dame. You just are. It's a part of the process. They don't base their picks off standings. This is not the NFL, where it's the same 32 teams all playing each other, and whoever just has the best standings gets in the playoffs. There's so many other factors that go into this. It's based off of, it's a popularity vote. College football playoffs is a popularity vote. The AP poll is a popularity vote. It's a popularity vote. What do you want them to do? They're going to pick the teams that they think have the best players, regardless of their record. They're going to base their picks partially on record, yes, partially on people who they play, but also partially they think that Texas has some of the best players. I'm not sitting here saying that Texas should be a guarantee lock for the playoffs. I'm not sitting here, kissing their ass and telling you that they're 100% right. But I'm just giving you a fact that is SEC teams and Big Ten teams are going to get more leeway than Big 12, ACC, any other conference. And you can come up with a million different conspiracy theories why. It's mostly just because, again, they have the most money, they have the best coaches, they get the best players. All those 4- and 5-star kids that come out of high school get recruited for Alabama, Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, like all these big-time schools. So you can go, 0-2 to start the season, then run the table, and you'll be a top 6 team. You know what I mean? So I'm not in the camp of, because Texas has 2 losses, that there's no room for them there at all. I'm in the camp that you lose early, it does matter. You're a different team than you were week 1, week 2 right now. We're in week 11. You're telling me that Georgia is the same team they were week 1? Penn State's the same team they were week 1? A&M, Indiana, Ohio State, none of these teams are the same team they were week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. Teams develop over time. You lose early, it doesn't mean as much. Notre Dame, lose early, doesn't mean as much. Texas, lose early, it doesn't mean as much. You're not the same team that you were X amount of weeks ago. So Texas being considered being in that, I think, 10th spot right now, Yeah, 10th spot. I get it. I get some people who hate Texas, hate the fact that they're in the top 10 now. They're back after thinking again that they would not be written off, or that they would be written off, I should say. I get it. If you're still with me right now, riding solo, and you like this, give this a like. I don't know why we don't do this during the podcast where we actually do the cliche thing of like, hey, maybe you should subscribe to the podcast, give this video a like. I guess I'm going to be the only professional here who understands how YouTube works and how podcasting works. God, I'm just sitting here bashing my friends, aren't I? They aren't here to defend it. Here's the thing. Anybody who's been paying attention to the podcast for the last X amount of weeks, that the three of us have been doing this. If you were in my shoes, you'd understand. You'd understand the pain that I have gone through of sitting here constantly holding my guard, being a true shield for, the truth, the true understanding of what maybe should be considered as the number one thing is the top 12. I get bashed on that by those two more than anything. I get bashed on those two as far as my number one team I've been having in my top 12 more than anything else. And in some ways, I understand. If you need to understand anything as far as a viewer, my opinions on college football generally compared to them, it seems, and this is just my opinion, it seems that my opinions when it comes to, say, the top 12 differ from them in the sense that I like Adam's hatred of the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the leeway that, like I said earlier, the leeway that the SEC and Big Ten schools get for, I remember him mentioning like a good loss. When it's a popularity contest, that is a thing. A good loss. You can have bad losses and you can have good losses. That's not even like a popularity. That's more of just like a sports thing. A bad loss is you get blown out 34-0. But you can have a good loss where you looked like the better team the whole game and just a couple small mistakes cost you the game and you lost. That's a good loss. You know, you can have games where, you get close 10-3 and you're driving down the field with 2 minutes to go and you get down to the 10 and you're barely get the ball into the end zone. You tie it up and then you turn around. Your defense makes one big mistake with less than a minute to go and the other team goes down and scores a touchdown and then you lose by 7 anyways. Those instances happen in any sport. The whole idea of having a good loss is a thing. Sorry, it just is. Those teams that have good losses to good teams also, it plays a factor into it. To me, I think good losses should be considered and should be not awarded, because that's not the right way. You shouldn't award somebody for losing, but more so, don't be so harsh on somebody for having a good loss. Don't destroy them because it takes away. Do we want to see Ole Miss play Citadel this late into the season? Do we want to see that? Because if you start lambasting teams for having any loss and not giving them leeway for having good losses, then they're not going to want to play top end schools at any, like they're going to try their best to do the Alabama, to play some ho-dunk fucking school in God knows where so that they can just stack another loss onto the record. Like that's what you're going to get more of. And as a fan of sports, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that at all. When you can choose your schedule and you can just choose who you want to play, I don't want to see teams intentionally choose to play a Citadel or intentionally choose to play a Rhode Island so that they can just have an easy win. I don't want that. I want to see top end schools. I want to see what we saw this year. I want to see Texas play Ohio State week 1 right off the bat. I want to see that because I'm seeing really good teams play really good teams. I'm seeing a possible national championship matchup week 1. I want to see more of that. And so I think that being super harsh on good losses is not the best thing. And that's a personal opinion of mine. But anyways, back to I went on a side tangent here. If you notice, if I'm alone and I'm in control of the show and I just have free reign like this, I'm all over the place. So bear with me here. My point earlier, though, as far as my attempt to try to transition that I've totally screwed up now. The one thing I get bashed on more by my friends is the top 12. I was about to say Big 10. I don't know why I almost said that. The top 12. And the number one thing that those two differ from me is the number one team in my top 12. I have held firm that Ohio State is the number one team, and I was backed up not only by the AP poll for the last how many weeks, which, of course, what a shocker. The AP poll is so terrible because it doesn't agree with them. And they talked about how they constantly brought up the Illinois, and what a coincidence. Isn't this also funny too? I just thought of this. Isn't it a coincidence that last week on this very show, Adam had even brought up this idea that, we're finally going to get to have a second opponent to compare the Ohio State Indiana number 1, number 2 debate to, because the constant thing the only like opponent that Ohio State and Indiana have had up to this point was Illinois. Now we have Penn State. I'm going to go on record and say Indiana probably should have lost that game without one of the best catches, for sure the best catch we've seen all year, but one of the best catches I've seen in my lifetime by Omar Cooper. Without that catch, Indiana's got one loss. And may I remind you that this is the same Penn State team that has been, you want to talk about different teams throughout the season. This team is not even anything close to what it was week 1. You got no Drew Aller at quarterback. You got Grunkmeyer at quarterback. James Franklin's been fired. This team's morale has been basically destroyed. There is no hope for the rest of the season. There's hope for next year when they end up bringing in a new coach, but there is no hope for this team right now. This team is simply just playing for pride. And the Indiana team that is competing for a national championship almost lost to this team. And honestly, we talk about good wins and bad wins and good losses. That's a bad win. That Indiana game is a bad win. And to me, you want to talk about the Illinois game is the only thing we can compare it to? Bring up the Penn State game. That Penn State team had Indiana beat. I mean, to start the drive for Indiana, Mendoza gets sacked right off the jump, and I'm sitting there as a viewer watching the game going, oh my God, Penn State's about to beat Indiana, and I'm about to be proven right that Ohio State is the number one team. And then they drive down the field, and then Mendoza happens, and then you see one of the best catches I've ever seen in college football. I will give Indiana credit. It was a hell of a drive, and they did win the game. But to me, from now on, we need to bring up that Penn State game. If we're going to make the comparison of Ohio State, Indiana, who should be number 1, who should be number 2, that Penn State game needs to be brought up. Because that, we've had instances in previous podcasts where we've talked about how Alabama should have lost to South Carolina. There was that game a couple weeks ago. There's been times where teams struggled mightily and should have lost to X team. Indiana should have lost to Penn State. They should have lost. That was a loss. Without that catch, that's a loss. So to me, I find it funny. Like I said, how ironic it is that I'm the only one on the show. The only one on the show. The week that Indiana struggles mightily against Penn State and almost loses. The only person on the show who sat here steadfast and said Ohio State number 1, Indiana 2. The only one. So, speaking of my top 12, let's dive into my top 12. I have a couple of changes, not too many changes. A couple of teams had byes this week. They did not play. So we did move a couple things around. Funny enough, if we want to go through the way that it has been, how Hank has had us go through our top 12, let's go through my number 1 through 4. Funny enough, I don't have to change my top 4 at all again this week. Ohio State is still the number 1 team. Destroyed Purdue this week. Had a great game. Again, solidifying the fact that they are the number 1 team. I also said last week, I don't know why Julian Sayin is a Heisman contender. I understand why the odds makers have done it, and I understand why it's an easy thing to do to just pick the quarterback of the best team. I get it. That's the easy choice. And for some reason, especially in football now, that's the only choice, it seems. That because the quarterback is considered, and it is, if you want to talk about what's the most valuable position in football, the quarterback is. So by virtue, of course, people are going to pick quarterback of the best team. But there's times where somebody like a Jeremiah Love should be considered for the Heisman. And this is why I would love to know. I asked this question last week. I'm going to ask it again. What exactly is the classification to determine who should win the Heisman? I want to know. Is it stats? Is it just best player on best team? Because even if it is best player on best team, I like Julian Sayin. He plays very well in a system, but he's not the best player on Ohio State. There's 10 guys on defense that are better than him. Maybe that might be a stretch, but there's how many guys on defense that are better than him, that play better than him. Downs is better than him. You want to talk about Jeremiah Smith? There's so many different guys on that Ohio State team that are better than him. So him being considered, top end for the Heisman, to me, if you want to talk about somebody who really is carrying the team, let's go to my number 2 team, Indiana. Mendoza carries Indiana, carried them, had an amazing drive where he was the one pushing the ball down the field. Go back and look at some of those throws. We want to praise Amar Cooper for that amazing catch. Praise Mendoza for placing that thing exactly where he needed it to where only Cooper could catch that. I loved that drive from him. And that's why I'm going to second what I said last week. I think he is my number 1 pick for the Heisman right now, without a doubt. And especially now, everybody's talking about him being the number 1 pick from the draft this year. He should be, if you want to talk about quarterback on the best team as your classification, even though Indiana is not the best team, I would accept Mendoza as the Heisman winner. I would accept that. I still think that there are other people that you should consider right next to him, but I would accept it up to this point. So anyways, my top 4, Ohio State, like I said, number 1, Indiana at 2. I still have A&M at 3. No arguments there, I don't believe. And I still have Alabama at 4. Now, Alabama, there's the 2 teams right there that are 4 and 5 that this is why it's almost like I only believe in one team right now. It's kind of gotten to that point because every other team has shown flaws. And maybe it's almost to the point where it's like everybody's shown flaws, but I'm just waiting for Ohio State to show their flaw. And maybe their flaw is putting in a high pressure situation where the game's real close and you got to kind of step up as the quarterback, Julian saying, maybe that's their weakness. And maybe that'll come to fruition at the Big Ten championship or national championship game, some other playoff game. We'll see on that. But yeah, my top four, Ohio State, Indiana, A&M, and Alabama at 4. The other team I am still very much kind of iffy on is Georgia. Like I said earlier, just the constant struggle every single week. This is another week. We'll get into that game later. Another week where I sit there and I say to myself, I struggle mightily with being able to really put a stamp on saying they are a true championship contender. There's so many things. There's so many plot holes. There's so many holes in that team that really I struggle with. So Georgia at 5. I still have Ole Miss at 6. Texas Tech with the big time win against BYU. I moved them up to 7. Still somewhat close to what they actually have, what the playoffs have Texas Tech as. And I have Oregon at 8. Now, Oregon is another one. I was very bullish early on Oregon. I had them number 1 earlier in the season, like way early, like weeks. I almost said years ago. Weeks ago, I had Oregon at number 1. Now, obviously, I've course corrected and have them down at 8. And I've had them in that spot for a bit, but I've had Oregon in that spot because even a game like Iowa's a good team. I think Iowa's an extremely underrated team. I mean, they beat the piss out of my Minnesota Gophers. And the Gophers are no joke. I don't believe that they're any joke. I think they're a solid 8-4, 7-5 team, and they're more on the track of a 7-5 now. But they're no joke. And to beat them that badly, or to shut down Drake Lindsay like that, it deserves to be acknowledged. I think Iowa is an underrated team. Maybe not in the college football rankings, but as far as most people's eyes, I don't think a lot of people look at Iowa as like a top 20 school or a top 20 team right now. But I would say more people as the season concludes here, I think more people will start to really acknowledge Iowa's existence, I was going to say, but really acknowledge how good they are. But I got Oregon at that spot because there's small things like everyone's beating up on Wisconsin, and I understand it was a rain-delayed game and it was kind of funky. 21-7 is a bit closer of a margin than I would have liked. Again, I'm being nitpicky maybe. And also Oregon barely sneaking out a win over Iowa. It's a good win. I think it's still a good win, but there's things in Iowa's arsenal that I'm still on. I still like Dante Moore as a quarterback. I think Dante Moore is one of those guys that will be okay in college, but depending upon who he gets drafted by, that will be the ultimate thing of like whether we really see how good he is. If he gets drafted by a Tennessee or, a Tennessee Titans, I should say, if he gets drafted by a Tennessee Titans, it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be what you see with Cam Ward right now, where looks like Tennessee made a mistake, but I think it's more so just the team. But if he gets drafted, say, like by let's try to think of a good team. I mean, a Minnesota Vikings, a team that has constantly struggled to find the right quarterback for the last God knows how many years, has bounced around guy to guy to guy and had very good teams around said quarterbacks, but only the quarterback can take him so far. Take a Dante Moore and put him in that Minnesota, San Francisco. Obviously, those are the easy layups, but I'd even say more so, I don't want to say Raiders, but maybe, the Raiders have some interesting pieces there. Pete Carroll, I still think can coach decently well. I just don't think that they don't have the team right now. But knowing that Pete Carroll is still a very good coach, I believe, his history of success in Seattle before he left, I still think that that's a decent spot for him as well. There's other teams that probably I'm blanking on that maybe could take him. But Oregon, back to the Oregon part, I struggle with them still. I have them at 8. 9 through 12, I have Notre Dame at 9. Again, I'm sorry, But it's this revolving door of that 9 through 12 that's going to constantly change. Texas is at 10. I know it sucks. I know that people don't like it. I know that everybody's like, oh my God, Texas is back. What have they done? Well, let's look at what Texas has done. I'm going to pull up exactly who they've played because they lost to Ohio State week 1, by the way, only by a touchdown. Played a bunch of nameless, faceless small teams, San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston. Easy wins, no problem. Lost to Florida. That's a bad loss. That should be considered a bad loss. So that should be a ding against them. But then you go on this 4-game run now where you've beaten 2 ranked teams, Oklahoma, who was at the time ranked 6th, and now is ranked, what are they, ranked 11th? So it's still a high-ranking win. By the way, 23-6, not exactly a nail-biter. Barely beaten Kentucky is not great, but Mississippi State and then Vanderbilt. 3-point win over Vanderbilt, which again is another ranked win. Those should be rewarded. And again, it's not fair because the SEC teams always get lucky, or not lucky, but they always get, premier care. They always get, more leeway, whatever term you want to use. I understand your frustrations with that, but it's just a fact. Texas has some of the better players. They've came back. They've recovered from their losses earlier in the season. They're on a 4-game run now. And like I said, I have them at 10. It's not like I have them at 5. It's not like I have them top 5 right now next to Georgia. They play Georgia this week. They might lose to Georgia, and then next week they're not even in my top 12, and I won't even consider them. And nobody else should consider them either. If they lose to Georgia this week, they shouldn't even be considered to be in the playoffs, period. They are on. This is why I said earlier, they got their mulligans out of the way. They have no more mulligans. This is it for them. This is their last shot. So anyways, I got Texas at 10. And again, with the recent losses and this rotation of guys, the Virginia loss, I had Virginia in the top 12 last week. I had Louisville 13. The BYU loss, rotating teams out, Georgia Tech's back at 11. I think that the playoff committee is low on Georgia Tech. Now, again, I understand it's all Haynes King. Maybe it is all Haynes King, and you might be right. But the fact is that they're still a 1-loss program, correct? I'm going to double check this before I say this and then sound like a dumbass. 1-loss program. They're still 8-1. You want to reward ACC teams, then yeah. I don't think they should be as low as they are in the college football playoff. I mean, hell, they're what? 18? 16. 16's too low. Let's put it this way. Miami's above them. You want to talk about superficial treatment. Miami has had 2 bad. You want to talk about bad losses. Miami's bad losses. You lost to SMU. Now, Louisville, we thought earlier was a bad loss, but it turned out to be not as bad of a loss. But that's a 2-loss ACC team. You're telling me the 2-loss ACC team is below Georgia Tech, the 1-loss program? I don't see that. To me, Miami, I still have Miami at well back. If you want to talk, I got Miami at 17. I still got Virginia, Louisville, Oklahoma, Utah. I still got all these other teams ahead of Miami. So I don't know where this love for Miami is getting. I really don't. But back to what I was saying earlier. I got Georgia Tech at 11. 1-loss program. You want to talk about me not rewarding undefeated teams earlier? I'm being fair here. I still think Georgia Tech, with, again, revolving door of that 9 through 12. It's going to continue throughout the rest of the season until the season is over. So Georgia Tech is at 11. And I'm being fair. BYU's had some good wins this year against teams that are behind them. Utah has moved up the rankings. That's now considered a very good win. I still have BYU at 12. Now, I already know what my co-host would say. You're bouncing them out of the playoffs. Yes, because a G5 school, which is a whole nother argument, is bouncing them out. Now, because we haven't had this conversation, We're getting long on the run time, but I still want to touch on this. Should a G5 school just for sure get a berth? I've seen this conversation come up a couple times, especially over these last couple weeks because of just the chaos of the American Conference. And everybody kind of having this like acknowledgement that, yeah, maybe a G5 school, they just don't have they have no chance. A G5 school has no chance of making it anywhere past the first round. And I understand that you want to include these other smaller schools. I understand you want to include teams from the Sun Belt, the MAC, the Mountain West, the American. And let's be honest, does a MAC team really ever have a shot of making it to being that 12th team? No, they don't. I don't care if there's an undefeated Akron team that comes out of the MAC or an undefeated Toledo. It's not happening. I don't think it'll take a miracle. It'll take even more chaos than we've already seen now and true utter dominance from a team in the MAC like a Toledo in order to be that 12th team. But again, say that happens. Does Toledo ever have an actual shot of winning in that first round? Let's put it this way. Let's go back to the playoffs. There's chaos still, so there's still a chance that any one of these teams could be somewhere between, 5 to 12. But let's say, for argument's sake, right, it's the top 4 teams get buys. So 5th would be Georgia. So you're telling me Georgia, even with all of their struggles, even with all of their ups and downs, do you actually believe that Georgia would lose to a Memphis, to a USF, to a James Madison, North Texas, Tulane? Do you really think that Georgia would lose to any of these teams? 1 in a million, not saying it's truly impossible, but it is beyond extremely improbable. And I understand that these smaller schools, it's nice. But let's be honest, to me, it feels like a participation trophy. Do you want the playoffs to truly be about best teams playing and getting an opportunity? Or is it just, let's get as many people in there as we can? Is it March Madness? You know what I mean? Like, is that what we're going to turn this into? That's why this argument about 2014 playoff, I already said fuck once before, but I'm going to say it again. Fuck that. I don't want to add any more. I already think 12 is well enough. I want nothing to do with a 24-team playoff at all. I think that's beyond stupid. The more people you add into a playoff, the more unpredictability you get, and the less likely you actually have the best team actually coming out and being the champion. I don't need any more teams in there, because not only that, but you're having more games, more opportunity for good players on said teams to get hurt. I don't want that. I want the best guys playing the best guys on the field. I don't want the best guys sitting on the sidelines. It's disappointing every time that a star player gets hurt. The more times you sent them out there, the more times you make them go through, a useless game against a USF or a Memphis. It's a useless game. It's basically a longer bye. Sorry, shouldn't be there. So in my argument, yeah, BYU should be in. BYU should be that 12th team. I understand the argument also of like we need to include every school, though. I understand, or every conference. I understand that. Everybody should have an opportunity if you're actually the best teams. If James Madison or Memphis or USF actually had a team that was legitimately on the level of of BYU and they got that 12th spot over BYU, then fine. Then fine. You have an argument there. But even this argument here, would you actually consider a one-loss BYU on the same level of a Memphis or a USF or any of these other teams? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. So there's my top 12, and there's my argument. Oh, by the way, some other key points. Again, you leave me out, I'm going to rant. More craziness. Navy lost to Notre Dame, so I think that pretty much eliminates them from being that G5 school. I still have North Texas as my G5 school right now. It is still a completely up in the air, like we talked about last week. I mean, it's just the American has been chaos. It seems like everybody is just unanimously picked that no matter what, a team from the American is going to make it, no matter how much chaos there is, even though James Madison's still out there, San Diego State's still out there. There's other teams out there in other conferences that you could still consider, but we've kind of just written them all off. We've already kind of chosen the American as the team. So, or as the conference, I should say. But I'm still taking North Texas right now as my G5 pick. We'll see how that plays out this week. Some last couple things. Hank likes to, I guess, go over some betting choices for the week. I'm not going to bet on these, actually. Maybe I'm a Debbie Downer about that. And if you've lasted this long, we're over now an hour. Like I said earlier, if you've enjoyed this show and you want to see more of me, go down in the comment section and say you want to hear more from me if you like it. If you want to hear less from me, let me know. I'll shut up more. I already don't talk a lot. This is the most I've talked probably on the show ever. Obviously, I've gotten to talk for an hour straight without an interruption. This is probably the only time. This is probably the only time, because now from now on, when Adam and Hank come back, it'll be them two going back and forth. And I understand that my history knowledge of college football, as far as knowing past coaches and knowing past players and knowing past history, is less than theirs. I'm acknowledging that. I'm not a history buff when it comes to college football. I have my limitations in that regard, but I feel like my opinions are decent. I said when I first got invited to do this show, I said I was going to be the Skip Bayless of the show. Loud, abrasive, don't know what the fuck you're talking about, but hey, try to be as entertaining as you can. And I try. A guy can only do so much when there's 10 people watching, but a ton more people on the shorts. Keep liking those shorts, keep watching them. But like I said earlier, like, comment, subscribe, all of the same stuff that everybody else says in all the other YouTube videos. Please do. Let's run through some bets here and let's get out of here. Some key games going into this week. We have Oklahoma and Alabama. A sneaky, close game, I think this will be. Alabama's kind of up and down, struggle a little bit of not being able to be. They're the fourth team, I think, but it's this weird thing of them not being able to have this, like, a stamp approval win of, like, this is a dominant win. Indiana have had those. Ohio State have had those. A&M have had those. I'm waiting for Alabama to have that. They keep having these, like it's the same thing with Georgia, barely eking out wins, not truly a dominant win. I'm waiting for them to put I want them to have a game like that. It would be nice to see them, hey, beat Oklahoma by 20. Have a stamp approval game to say, yes, we are a true contender for the national championship right now. Because right now it's still iffy. But the line right now, I saw all of my lines provided by DraftKings. The line I got on DraftKings, Oklahoma is +6. Because of Alabama's struggles of being able to put teams away, I'm taking I'm taking Oklahoma to cover against Alabama on that +6. It might be a 3-point win. Again, close games. Too many close games, too many close calls for Alabama. I'm going to take Oklahoma. Another key game this week, Iowa with the almost just barely getting eked out by Oregon. They're playing USC this week. I love Iowa against USC. USC, their game is the complete opposite of Iowa's. It's the complete antithesis of Iowa. They are going to struggle to stop the run. They're not going to be able to be as tough as Iowa. I'm taking Iowa. Again, the line I got was 6.5. I'm taking Iowa to cover that 6.5 against USC, and I might take them to win outright. Texas and Georgia, extremely key game this week. If Texas loses, like I said, I think they're done for the playoffs. I don't think they're in. Georgia, this is a key game because now, weeks ago, we would have said, Georgia, this is just another game, playing a mid-level team. Just don't overlook them because it's still Texas. Now this is also kind of a prove-it game for Georgia. Georgia needs to put a stamp on this game as well if they want to be considered as, again, another true national championship contender in most people's eyes. They have struggled in a lot of different avenues as far as, like I said, having convincing wins. Alabama and Georgia have basically been the same team for the last couple of weeks. I'm taking Texas, though, because, again, Texas is on this hot streak, 4-game winning streak. They're a different team than they were weeks ago. I'm taking a chance. I have Texas. I got the line at 6.5. I'm taking Texas to cover that 6.5 against Georgia. And then finally, because we here on the podcast like to talk about G5 schools, and more specifically, the two guys that are usually here like Navy. So we'll talk about the Navy-USF game. Another key game. USF is now, again, considered the number one school in the American. This could be a very key game because Navy, it's complete chaos in the American. It just is. Navy got beat up pretty bad by Notre Dame and kind of shown that, all right, they aren't really a true contender. But if Navy goes in now and beats USF, and now that completely, again, blows it up completely. I am going to take Navy because, I got the line. Navy is plus 10.5. I'm taking Navy to cover that plus 10.5, even if USF barely ekes it out by a field goal or a touchdown. I think Navy can keep it within 10. I think they can keep it close. Again, American is chaos. You don't know what's going to happen week to week. And if USF loses this game, this would really, really hurt them in the rankings, I think. So I'm going to end it here because we're an hour and 7 minutes in. I appreciate if anybody made it this far into the show. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to just little old me, the one who doesn't get to talk a lot on the show, and gets the opportunity now to have an open book to say whatever the hell he wants and truly give his perspective on things. I appreciate you listening this far in. Next week, we should be back to our same normal time. We record on Wednesdays, post on Thursdays, I think around midday or whatever, right here on the Bat Flip Entertainment YouTube channel. The thing's almost over. If you're still here, again, I appreciate you. Hopefully everybody enjoyed. Don't know if Hank will be back next week, but hopefully Adam will be back next week, and he will have an opportunity to lambaste me as much as he likes, and I will sit there and I will have him have the floor because why not? You know, it's just a show tradition to sit there and poo-poo on me as much as they like. So again, thank you all for watching, listening, like, comment, subscribe. Tell me I suck. Tell me you like me. Tell me that the other guys suck. Tell that Hank guy to learn how to wear a hat. This guy's bald and he's wearing his hat like this. Like this. This looks ridiculous. And yet he chose to wear his hat like that. I'm not going to let him let that down. He doesn't care. He's in Hawaii right now. Why does he care what I have to say? Anyways, thank you all again for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we will see you all next week.